Okay, we are back on episode number 2. So we left last week with talking about leaving Sierra Leone after 22 and a half years of living there and serving there and just investing your life into missions. And we said that this week we were going to talk about what was it like, because when you left, you were sitting there saying, what if, like what's going to happen? Like, will I ever see these guys again? What's going to happen to the work? Because, you know, we were leaving in the midst of devastation and just so much uncertainty. And so what was it like then? Because it was 21 years later then that you actually got to go back to Sierra Leone and put your feet back on the ground. So what was that like after all these years, getting back in Sierra Leone, and how did that all work out? So I'll let you tell that story.
Well, I've been invited to go back to Sierra Leone several times by the National Church, and actually our mission director, Chester Heath, and Ralph Heath had gone back several times. I was invited to go along on a couple of the trips, and just because of financial problems and timing and everything, I had no peace about going back. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in a chair on the morning doing my devotions when I got a phone call from Vernon Jarvis. They were getting ready to go back to Sierra Leone. They were putting in a Christian radio station, and we started talking about that, and we wanted to support that too, and our church gave several $1,000s towards getting that project fulfilled. And of course, the conversation, he mentioned to me about maybe going with them, and immediately, you talk about peace. I got a peace that overwhelmed me, and I just I said, Vernon, this is my time. I want to go back. So we was all excited. We started making the plans. We was going to go back that next year, and then the Ebola broke out in Sierra Leone, so we held up for a whole year. We had everything ready to go, but for a whole year we could not go back because of the thousands of people that were dying over there and the tragedy that hit the country. But come January of 2016, the doors opened up for us to go. We planned our trip, and it was Vernon and Jarvis and also Floyd Turner and that were going, and I was going to go along with them, and then my two son-in-laws, when they found out I was going, they wanted to go. I couldn't believe it. And I was wanting my sons to go, and they couldn't because of the work and things going on in their lives. But my two son-in-laws, they said, we want to go. So I was so excited for Gannon and Jeff to come along. And then Gannon's dad, Dave, one of my board members and dear friend, and Sherry's father-in-law. So we were so excited. So everybody started getting ready, and next thing you know, we're getting on the plane and we're flying to Sierra Leone, and we couldn't wait to get there. We got there. That was a story, I'm telling you. We'll say that later on, getting lost. We got across the ferry, and they got stranded and had to take a 5-hour journey around the peninsula to get
There's like 5 stories in every story.
That was a traumatic night. A landing, it was pitch dark. And it was horrendous. It was the scariest moment I think those guys had ever had in their life.
We're going to have to interview them.
So that's another story in itself when we landed and got separated for about 5 hours. And the last thing my wife said, don't get separated, keep your eyes. I said, don't worry, honey, I'll take care of the guys. Next thing I know, I'm wanting to shoot myself. I'm thinking, we're separated. These guys got to come around the peninsula. Over half the team had to come around the peninsula. Very, very dangerous too.
Gannon, I'd been speaking Creole to him for a while. I always talk Creole to him. If I get mad, I'll speak Timony to him, so that way he doesn't understand what I'm saying. But I had been speaking Creole to him, so he gets out of the car and he's listening to these guys, and Jeff Haney is scared out of his mind. He's like, get back in the car. And Gannon's like, I can understand them. And so he's like, oh, guess what, guys? We're not seeing those guys. This is the last ferry going into Freetown. So that's another whole story. We'll have to interview that. But Gannon could understand, and he's like, this is bad.
So many things happened that night, but we got in the country, finally got there. It was Dave and me and Bakary, the guy that pastor, brother and sister Culver's pastor that had to work in Freetown, that was putting the radio station in. But the other guys were all separated from us. And it was pretty traumatic. But we got there, though, and was sweet just being in Sierra Leone, in Freetown. Things were still devastating in that country. The ferry looked like the Ancient of Days. I thought it was going to be a real brand new ferry, and it was worse than when I left the country. I was thinking, man, this is not improved at all. Road was horrendous, scary. We get there though, and we put in the radio stations. The guys all get there. We work hard for about 5 or 6 days. We get the radio station in. We was able to travel up country with Jeff. He wanted to go up and see where Vicky was born. So we took an excursion right after we got the station up, and took Jeff up and brought him back in one day so that he could go up and see where Vicky was at. But he had to fly home earlier. He wasn't able to stay the next week with us. But after we got everything in, Isaac, our national leader, came down. It's Isaac and Daniel John, they're brothers that run our mission there. These are the guys who we discipled and trained up and challenged before we left the work. There 22 years before, I'd sit down with Daniel. Isaac, the guy that came down to get us, was in Nigeria. We just sent him there to get further training. Daniel, his brother, had come back from Nigeria. He had been there for 3 years or 4 years training in Nigeria. And actually, we brought Daniel back to take over the work. My wife and I were not planning on going back to Sierra Leone. A lot of people don't know that. We'd already met with Brother Heath. This was our last term. We were not going to go back to Sierra Leone. We had no clue that the war was going to end up changing everything quicker than we thought. But we had told Brother Heath when we left that time that we would not be going back to Sierra Leone. Our children's ages and going into college and everything that was going on in our life, we felt that the Lord was bringing us home. We had no clue the war was bringing us home. But we had talked with Daniel. We'd already told him, this is our vision, this is our dream for you guys to take over the work, and we just want to prepare you for that moment. Didn't know that a year and a half later, I'd be meeting with them at that house and saying, Daniel, here's the keys. It's your work now. He would already knew in his heart what we wanted. And now here's Isaac. He had come back from Nigeria. The two brothers were working together. They just tremendously how God had prepared them to carry on this work. And Isaac came down to get me and take me up country with Gannon and Dave Nickel. Off we went. Vernon and Floyd both flew back. Flew back to America, but the three of us went on up country. And what a time did we have. I mean, it was quite a journey going up, about 150 miles going up into that area.
Up country is where we had our mission.
That's where we grew up.
That's where that was our home.
We went to the Bible school and, where we had built there in Tongalili and Moborca area. And it was called Tongalili Bible Institute, and it was devastated. It still was devastated from the rebels. They had taken over and pretty much destroyed the place, and our hearts was broken. I felt like Nehemiah going back to Jerusalem and seeing all the walls torn down, and everything. And that was a vision we got. And we.
Can I say something there?
Yes, sure.
Gannon, so my husband is Gannon, and he got to go back with my dad, and I was a little bit jealous. It was a godly jealousy. I say it was godly. But I felt like I was kind of living it through him, and he would send me videos on Voxer. He had Wi-Fi connections at certain times, so he'd take pictures and videos and stuff, and then he would send them to me later on when he had connection. But he sent me this one video, and when he was talking about like the ruins and stuff, and he sent me a video, and he's like, do you know where this is? And I'm like, man, I know that place. Like, it was like my brain knew it, but it looked so different. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I'm like, I know that place, but what is it? And he goes, that was your bedroom. And I'm like, oh, like it just looked so devastated, and like the front walls of our compound were broken down. And I was actually reading the book of Nehemiah at this time while he was in Sierra Leone, and how he went back to rebuild the ancient ruins and rebuild the walls. And I literally saw the broken down walls around our compound, and I'm like, oh, it's just been devastated. So I can't imagine, like, just from the pictures that I saw of what was our stomping grounds, and just the way the war just marred the land. But I think at the end of the day, what I realized through all of that is it's really not about the stuff. I mean, the stuff matters to our eyes, and it just shows what they've been through. But you'll hear more about like what he actually, that was just the outside. But what matters is the people that you develop. And I mean, and just to piggyback on that one more time, Gannon, like, the thing that probably impacted him the most was the reverence. Well, first of all, he said when he sat with Dan, or with Isaac, Pastor Isaac, and Dad will tell this story in a little bit, but like Pastor Isaac, he sat with him, and he was sharing how he was he was captured by rebels and he was beaten, I mean, almost to death and almost unrecognizable. And the guy next to him got killed. But the way God, I mean, that whole story is going to be another story in itself, but the way God preserved his life. But Gannon said when he was sitting there that night, he sent me a message and he couldn't hardly talk. Like he was like all choked up because he said it felt like he was sitting with the apostles. He said he can't even explain what it felt like sitting with these leaders. And he said he's never experienced anything like that. It was life-changing for him. He's been a completely different person since then. But at the end of the day, he said they kept saying over and over, Pa, we just followed your example. We've just followed your example. And that's the thing that I can say about him from the very beginning. He's always modeled that servant leadership. He's never, ever seen himself up here and people down here. And never, ever, still to this day. Like he'll pastor, missionary, put his clothes on and go fix your plumbing. Even though he'll get in your sewer and clean it up. And but the servant leadership he led with is really what has made the difference. So what did you find, like, with as far as the devastation? Because there was 23 churches when we left Sierra Leone. And when you went back, what did you find?
Well, some places were devastated, but at the other time we seen a work that was flourishing. Couldn't believe it. Schools, secondary schools, primary schools scattered throughout the country, large schools of 700-800 people, from kindergarten all the way up to high school. Amazing. So we traveled up country. And so we saw devastation everywhere, but we also saw new works growing up everywhere. I couldn't believe. Had over 120 churches. I met with 30 pastors at one time in the capital city with a work that didn't even exist when we left the country and just flourishing everywhere. It was just unbelievable. And then I got up country and I had a meeting with the 90 pastors that came in from all over the country to meet with us there at the Christian Leadership College that Daniel started. And I couldn't believe that, 50, I think 2 or 56 acres of Bible school grounds with 18 buildings on that ground. Amazing. With an orphanage that they started from the Ebola with 40 kids. And I was wondering how in the world did they do all this? This is amazing. It was beautiful. It had a 60 kVA generator and just everything. It was so just amazing, almost impossible. And they started this. I said, Dan, how do you afford to run this orphanage? Where are you getting the money to do all this? He says, God, only God could do this, Brother Roy. And he says, in the dedication of the people, he says, you see all those ladies over there? We don't pay them one thing. They cook the breakfast. They take care of these kids. None of them get a salary. They do this on their own spare time. 40 wonderful little children. It's larger than that now. Just beautiful. Had a boys' dorm and a girls' dorm. Gorgeous, with mosquito nets and blankets and beds. And we have pictures of all the videos of it. It was just breathtaking to see what they were doing.
And to see how joyful those little kids are. I mean, they've lost so much. Gosh, it makes me cry because I see the...
And on the way up there, we stopped at the Bible school where we had built the Bible school at Tongalili there. And we was devastated by how it looked. The buildings were just all torn to pieces. And I got a burden at that time. I says, Isaac was there. He lived there on the compound. And he was heartbroken. He just didn't have the money to repair these buildings here. And they had the Bible college up country. And that's where they were focusing. But Isaac had a burden for his compound. And I said, Isaac, I want you to come and raise money. I want to renovate this place and change it over again. And Isaac got to come. A year later, he came from there and in just a short 6 weeks raised over $25,000, was able to renovate. And that's another story too of how that place has changed there. Exciting things happened while I was there, but just seeing all these churches, all these pastors, all these buildings, schools, and amazing stories from our pastors. Some I knew, some I'd never met, some we had saved their lives during the Rebel War. I remember one who walked up to me, and he was a great big tall guy. His name was Joseph, and I remember going and getting him out of they were going to kill him the next day. And his family came and begged me to go and get him in rebel territories. One of the last things I did while I was in the country, went in there and was able to rescue his life along with another church member. And he came to me, I was preaching in Maborka, and the church was packed out. And after the service and everything, I didn't even know Joseph was there. And he came up to me afterwards. Everybody was taking pictures, and he tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around and said, Joseph. And he says, Pa, you remember? And I says, oh my, Joseph. We hugged each other, and it was a God moment. to see what the Lord was doing. All these lives that made it through the war, still doing the work of the ministry. And some had passed away, some had died from disease and were killed, and various things that happened, the tragic stories. But in the midst of all the tragedy, I've seen such triumph, such victory, so many marvelous stories that it just will tell you as time goes on. All I can say, we was blown out of the water to see over 120 new churches. Many pastors, over 100, and I met with 120 pastors while I was there over the whole journey, and to see how the work had grown and what God was doing. All we can say, to God be the glory, great things he has done. And if there's one lesson I'd learned through all of this, is it's not about the structures and the buildings, it's about the people. And pouring your life into the people. Isn't that what Jesus taught us?
Servant leadership.
He discipled his men, and they turned the world upside down. And I asked Daniel, I said, Dan, how in the world, I said, you guys, how are you doing this? And he says, Pa, you taught us. Just by the way you lived, you taught us. The other missionaries taught us to pour our lives into the people. And that's the secret, I believe, of any growth, of any work, is leadership that is selfless and that will pour itself into the lives of others. And we are literally seeing the fruits of that in Sierra Leone right now.
And I mean, you always think of where there's no vision, the people perish. And like, that's what's so crazy to me, is how little they have, but how big their vision is, because they've seen what God can do. And I think it's easy for us in the U.S. to forget how much bigger God is than our little meager, what we think we need. We put so much stock in ourselves. And so servant leadership, humility, developing people, and just having big vision. And even just right before we did this video, we were looking at just messages from Pastor Dan, and just the vision that they still have. The vision is big, and they just keep stepping. They just keep taking another step. Just this, in the last 2 months, what, 10 churches have gone
10
up?
new churches have been planted. They're doing a nationwide outreach of evangelism. And just in the northern province, in 2 months, about 2 months' time, they established 10 new churches. This is unbelievable. It's going through the whole country right now as I speak to you. So we're excited. We got many stories to bring, hundreds of stories, and we hope you'll stick with us. And
in each story, there's like 17 more stories. So we have to screen it down to 15 minutes, which right now we're at 17. So we're going to wrap this up. But next time we come together, we're going to actually go way back to whenever, where did it all start? Like, what made you decide you're going to be a missionary? And that's another whole story in of itself. And so that's the question you guys will get to hear. Like, where did that happen? Like, how do you decide you're going to become a missionary? And where did all that start? So, which is a crazy story in and of itself. So thank you guys for listening. And if you guys have questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the comments, and we'd be more than happy to go and answer those questions. Or maybe we'll just make another whole video based off your question that you asked. So, all right, have a great day. Happy Thursday.
Bye-bye.